Spring of 2006. Lincoln Hall is making his way down from the summit of Everest. At some point, his eyes go blank. He loses his sense of direction. His words fall apart. His mind unravels as he walks. He starts mixing people up, talking to climbers who aren't on the mountain anymore, staring into empty space and answering questions no one asked. His legs buckle, his body sinks into the snow, his breathing slips out of rhythm, and his brain drifts into darkness. He is with 3 Sherpas who have been dragging him for 19 hours. They fall with him, lift him, take hits from his crampons, run out of oxygen. But they keep going, right up to the moment Hall stops responding at all. They check his pulse again and again and again until it fades. Around 5:20 in the evening, one of the Sherpas radios a short message. Hall is gone. They leave him on the mountain, cover him with a sleeping bag, and walk away, because staying any longer would mean dying beside him. Grief settles over base camp. In Australia, his family breaks down in tears, and Everest does what it always does. It claims another life. But at sunrise, when another team steps onto the north side, one of them sees something no one should ever see at that altitude. A sleeping bag, moving, just barely, but moving, in the place where a man had been declared dead the night before, in a place where the impossible is the norm. He gets closer, bends down, and sees something that will later be called the Everest miracle. Lincoln Hall is no newcomer to the mountains. He has decades of climbing behind him. The Himalayas, the Andes, Alaska. He has walked routes most people only read about. Australian by birth, a mountaineer by nature. At 50, he is still in excellent shape and still searching for a challenge. And there is one summit he has never claimed for himself: Everest. For most people, it's just a number in a textbook, 8,848 meters, the highest point on the planet. For Hall, it's a story left unfinished for more than 22 years. Back in the mid-80s, he stood on the north side of Everest, but turned around before the final push when his body gave out. Since then, the mountain has never left his mind. At home, his wife and 2 teenage sons are waiting for him. He leaves them behind, pauses his writing career, and accepts an invitation to join a new expedition. It is led by the Russian climber Alexei Abramov, a veteran of Everest, who is assembling an international team of about 20 people. The cost to join in the spring of 2006 is $15,000. The route follows the northern side through Tibet. Base camp sits at roughly 5,400 meters. From there, the team climbs higher toward the intermediate camps where they acclimatize to the thin air. For 2 months, they move up and down the mountain, letting their bodies adjust to the growing lack of oxygen. Hall knows exactly what he is walking into. He has seen Everest take the lives of seasoned climbers, and he understands that even perfect preparation doesn't promise a return. But fear is not a reason for him to stop. Discipline in the team is strict. Abramov watches everyone closely. Even a brief lapse in strength or focus can cost a life. Hall handles every test, showing strong form and steady confidence. Everything is going according to plan. But he can also see how the mountain wears people down. The cough, the sleepless nights, the loss of appetite, the first signs of frostbite. Everest slowly squeezes the strength out of everyone. And still, Hall stays calm. He knows why he is here. Ahead lies the summit he could not reach 22 years earlier. Now he has a second chance. And maybe the last one he will ever get. Hall is living in a tent pitched directly on the glacier. The wind hits the fabric like it's trying to rip it off. The nights are cold and uneasy. Sleep breaks every half hour, as if the body needs to check whether it's still breathing. Food tastes bland, water tastes metallic. But the spring of 2006 brings something rare: steady weather. Everest is usually locked behind storms and hurricane winds, but now the sky is clear and the air is calm. It feels as if nature itself has opened the door. Yet, these are the days when the mountain takes the most lives. Good weather dulls caution. People hurry, save oxygen, push farther than they should. And then Everest reminds them who is in charge at this altitude. In Abramov's team is an experienced Russian climber named Igor Klushkin, quiet, strong, confident. Hall talks with him in camp. They laugh, they make plans. A few days later, Klushkin is found dead, high on the mountain where breathing is almost impossible. Experience doesn't help. His body is left where it is. Bringing it down is impossible. It's a harsh but familiar rule on Everest. The team takes the hit. Another friend, another loss. By then, the mountain has already claimed at least 2 people early in the season. Everest expands its graveyard. More than 200 bodies rest here, climbers who could not be brought down. The cold keeps them preserved for decades. They lie along the route, becoming part of the path. Hall walks past and tries not to look, but he can't. Someone is sitting, leaning against a rock. Someone is frozen mid-step. Someone never took their gloves off. Each of them once dreamed of the summit. The team changes. The jokes fade, conversations grow shorter. The air fills with fatigue and silence. Everyone is thinking the same thing. Why am I here? Why am I risking everything for a few minutes on top? Hall calls home. He hears his sons, his wife. He tells them everything is under control, but the answer is quiet. That kind of quiet where you can hear fear. Abramov announces the summit push, the night between the 23rd and the 24th of May, 2006. The weather window is holding. If they are going, it has to be now. Everyone prepares, checking oxygen bottles, backpacks, warm face masks. No one sleeps in the tents. They count the hours. Hall lies there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Igor Klushkin, who died not long ago. Hall cannot fall asleep. The tent is dark and cold, and the wind hums through the guy lines like a string, and his mind keeps circling not around the summit push, not around oxygen, not around the forecast. It keeps circling one day. More than 22 years earlier, the year 1984, the same mountain, the same Lincoln Hall, only younger, bolder, certain he can do anything. Back then, he and Greg Mortimer tried the impossible. A new route on the north face of Everest, no oxygen, no Sherpa support. Just the two of them, and a wall no one had ever managed to climb. Pure alpinism, in the old sense of the word. When there are no sponsors, no safety nets, no backup plans. When you go into the mountains not for photos, but to understand who you really are. The north side is not a tourist trail. It is endless couloirs, ice-covered rock, avalanche-prone ridges. Every mistake can be the last one. Hall and Mortimer move slowly, day after day. No fixed ropes, no support. At an altitude where the air barely sustains life, every breath is an act of will. They sleep on tiny ledges where the tent stays up by sheer luck. They eat almost nothing, drink melted snow. Their minds feel drained, their bodies beg them to stop. But they keep going, because they know there will be no second chance. At roughly 8,000 meters, Hall feels his legs begin to go numb. The cold slips deep inside, his toes lose all sense. And he understands. If he climbs any higher, he will lose his legs, maybe his life. The decision comes instantly. He stops, not out of fear, but because he can see the edge clearly. Mortimer looks at him, asking without words, "What now?" Hall answers with one short line, "Go." Greg nods and heads upward, alone, without oxygen, on a route no human has ever climbed before. Hall stays on the slope, sitting in his down suit, watching his partner shrink into a tiny speck against the sky. He feels no triumph, only emptiness. Just a few hundred meters. That is all that separates him from the summit, the dream he has lived with for years. But he is not there. Mortimer reaches the top of Everest. He becomes the first Australian to stand on the summit from the north side without oxygen. A true hero. And Hall descends, alive, but carrying a weight he will hold for more than 22 years. A story left open, a wound he cannot close. He knows he did the right thing. In mountaineering, turning back is not defeat. It's respect for life, a decision that saves you and the people around you. But try explaining that to your heart. It doesn't listen. It remembers the cold slope, the moment when all he needed was a few more steps. Everest has lived inside him ever since. Not as a dream, but as a question with no answer. What if I had kept going? He comes back to it again and again. He writes books, raises his kids, tells stories about the mountains. Mortimer never blamed him. On the contrary, he thanked him. He said, "If you had pushed on, neither of us would have come back, because if something had happened to you, I would never have left you. I would have stayed no matter what." But Hall still can't let it go. For him, that day is a pause in the middle of a sentence he never got to finish. And now, in the spring of 2006, he is lying in a tent at nearly 7,000 meters. Tomorrow, the new summit push begins. This time with oxygen, with Sherpas, with a clear plan. Everything by the book. No romance, but a real chance. He is 50. He isn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He just wants to close an old chapter. Hall turns onto his other side and listens to the wind. Somewhere in the distance, an avalanche rumbles. He closes his eyes and sees the spot on the slope where he once turned back. Tomorrow, he will pass right by it. And maybe, for the first time in more than 22 years, he will finally be able to breathe freely. Hall wakes to the stillness of the high camp, 4 in the morning. The tent is dark, and around him lies that fragile, crackling silence only great altitude can create. He lies motionless for a few seconds, checking his body the same way others check their ropes. His pulse is steady, his head is clear, his breathing deep. A good sign. It means the acclimatization worked, and his body is ready to go higher. By touch, he finds the satellite phone. Today is his younger son's birthday, and Hall promised to call. A promise is something you don't break, even when you're living at nearly 7,000 meters and standing on the edge of the hardest night of your life. He dials the number. In Australia, it's evening. His son picks up right away, bright and cheerful. "Hi, Dad." Hall smiles in the dark. He wishes him a happy birthday, asks about the cake, the guests. For a few minutes, everything feels strangely normal, as if he's calling from a nearby town, not a glacier in Tibet. At the end of the call, his son asks, "Dad, are you coming home soon?" Hall pauses, then says, "Soon. Very soon." He ends the call, switches off the screen, and in the dark, he understands. He has just made a promise no one should make at this altitude, but he had no other answer. Outside, he hears footsteps. Abramov is moving from tent to tent, checking who is ready. The team needs to leave before sunrise. That's the rule on the North Route. Hall starts getting dressed. Layer after layer turns him into someone else. A resident of a world made of snow and wind. Thermal gear, fleece, down jacket, wind shell, mask on his face, goggles. Heavy boots. Every layer is a small insurance policy. A quiet promise to make it to sunrise. 3 Sherpas head out with him, Dawa Tarka, Mingma Norbu, and Pasang Gyaltsen. The Sherpas are a Himalayan people, born and raised at altitude. They break trail, set camps, carry loads, belay, rescue. They are the most experienced climbers on the mountain. All 3 are part of Abramov's team. Abramov, the expedition leader, stays behind in the high camp. He handles the radio, watches the schedule, and monitors every group on the route. But the summit push today belongs only to Hall and the Sherpas. That's how this expedition works. The commander coordinates, the high-altitude climbers move upward. The Sherpas climb in a steady rhythm, confident, as if the route were running under their skin. One of them has been on Everest so many times he stopped counting. And even he walks carefully, almost respectfully. No one calls themselves a hero on this mountain. Every step is borrowed time. At 5 in the morning, they begin the climb. Their headlamps cut thin blades of light through the dark. The slope in front of them is long and stubborn, as if testing their patience. The pace is fixed. 1 step, inhale, exhale, 1 step, inhale, exhale. At this altitude, you do not rush. Rushing here costs too much. The oxygen mask lets out a quiet hiss. Hall checks the flow. Everything is fine. On this climb, he is using oxygen, unlike in his attempt back in 1984. Then he went clean, without bottles. Now the rules are different. He isn't chasing a record or glory. He just wants to finish the story and make it home to his family. After a few hours of climbing, the route enters the death zone. Above 8,000 meters, the human body can't survive. Cells break down. The whole system works under protest, like an old engine running out of fuel. You can't stand still here, can't think too long, only move. And then, at the edge of his headlamp's reach, a shape appears. Through the faint cone of light, Hall sees a motionless figure sitting near a rock ledge. The man is leaning back against the stone, head dropped, hands frozen stiff, as if he is just resting. But he is not breathing. It is David Sharp, the British climber who died here 9 days earlier. A story that has already split the climbing world in 2. Sharp went up alone, with no team to back him. He sat down in a small stone alcove, Independence Cave, to catch his breath, and never left it. Climbers found him alive but barely conscious. At this altitude, helping someone is almost impossible. Dozens of climbers passed him. Some spoke to him. Some offered oxygen. But no one could bring him down. The Sherpas walk around the body in silence, no discussion. They have seen this many times. On Everest, those who cannot be evacuated remain. The mountain keeps its dead. Something inside Hall tightens. He knows this is not just a body. It is a question, a heavy one, as heavy as the mountain itself. What matters more, the summit or trying to save someone? And what would he have done if he had been in their place? No one knows the right answer. Because here, above 8,000 meters, morality collides with physics, and physics almost always wins. 9 hours of climbing. The slope feels endless, stretched out beyond reason. Every step is a small victory. Hall lifts his head and realizes there is no higher left. He steps onto a tiny shelf of snow and stops. He is on the summit of Everest, 8,848 meters. This is the altitude where airplanes fly, the point where the Earth ends and the edge of space begins, a place thousands of climbers dream about, but only a few ever reach. And now, more than 22 years after turning back, Hall is standing here, on the very spot that has lived inside his mind for so long. But instead of euphoria, there is silence, deep, clean silence, as if the whole world has been switched off. Hall looks around. The Himalayas stretch out for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Peaks rise through the clouds like the tips of a giant crown. The sky is almost black. The air here is that thin. It feels less like standing on a mountain and more like standing at the edge of the planet. He takes a few slow steps, letting the moment sink in. The Sherpas wait a little below, giving him a few minutes alone. On the summit, no one shouts, no one waves their arms. There is too little oxygen, and every mistake costs too much. Hall pulls out his radio and sends a message to base camp. His voice is rough but steady. "This is Hall. I'm on the summit." A second of silence. Then the speaker erupts with joy. Abramov congratulates him, as if he climbed it himself. Down in base camp, they yell, laugh, hug each other. The people below are celebrating. And up here, on the summit, stands one man. And what he feels is not victory, but calm, as if he has finally placed a period at the end of a sentence that began back in 1984. A chapter closed. He takes out the Australian flag, no pose, no drama. He simply plants it in the snow. Not for a photo, not for status, for himself, to mark a moment that once felt unreachable. But time works differently up here. At this altitude, every minute is borrowed from your future. Hall checks his watch. It's time. The Sherpas call to him from below. A light wind rises. The cold bites at his face even through the mask. He takes one last look around, trying to memorize everything. The color of the sky, the perfect line of the horizon, the strange clarity of thought that exists only in this place. Then he turns, begins the descent, calm, steady, without emotion. The summit is behind him, but the climb is not. The second half is always more dangerous than the first. It has taken most of those who now lie along the route. Hall goes down, step by step. The Sherpas are beside him, focused, alert. Down below, the team is celebrating his success. In Australia, his family has just heard the good news. Everyone believes the hardest part is over. Only the mountain knows it isn't. The first few minutes go smoothly. Hall moves on autopilot, as if his body remembers exactly where each foot should go. After summiting, a kind of light relaxation often creeps in. The body drops some of its tension. But it's a trick. The muscles are drained, the brain is running on leftover oxygen, and any small thing can turn into a problem. At first, it really does feel like simple exhaustion. His legs are heavier than they should be, his movements just a little slower. The Sherpas glance back from time to time. Hall is steady, holding the line. Everything looks normal, until something inside makes a tiny, almost invisible click, as if a switch flips somewhere deep in his skull. His legs suddenly feel like rubber, not just tired, but disconnected from the rest of him. He gives the command, lift the foot, and it answers with a delay. Hall shakes his head, trying to snap back into control. It doesn't work. The air feels different too. The mask hisses the same as before, but he senses less oxygen reaching him. And the brain reacts before the body does. His thoughts stretch, thick and slow, like they're moving through fog. His focus collapses. Even simple actions demand effort, as if he's solving some complex equation. These are the first, quietest signs of high-altitude cerebral edema. It always arrives unnoticed, like someone dimming the lights in your head, bulb by bulb. Hall keeps moving, but his steps are uneven now. The Sherpas notice immediately. "Lincoln, you all right?" Hall nods. "Tired. I'm fine." But his voice isn't right. Too loud, too slow. As if the words are pushing through heavy water. A few more minutes pass, and the blackouts begin. Hall forgets what he wanted to say. He looks around as if searching for something. Then he suddenly stops and turns toward the empty slope. "David, what are you doing here?" The Sherpas snap their heads around. There's no one there, only rock and snow. Hall stares into the emptiness as if he sees a living person beside him. One of the Sherpas steps closer. This isn't normal exhaustion. This is disorientation. A clear sign that high-altitude cerebral edema is starting. They continue the descent, but now two of them walk right beside Hall, holding him in the line. He mutters phrases that don't form any meaning. Several times he answers questions no one asked. Then he says he hears his wife's voice, that she's calling him home. The Sherpas exchange a quick look. This is dangerous. When a climber starts hearing home, warmth, family, it means the brain is already losing the border between reality and hallucination. Hall still understands he needs to keep moving, but the control over his body is slipping away. He tries to speed up, then suddenly sits down right on the slope. "I'll sit for a moment. No strength left." The Sherpas grab his arm. "No, you can't sit. Get up." Hall smiles softly, almost kindly. "Why not? It's nice here. Quiet." This is the most dangerous state of all. At this altitude, if a climber sits down and feels good, it is basically an invitation to fall asleep. And sleep here means death. One of the Sherpas pulls out the radio. "Base camp, Lincoln Hall has problems. Disorientation. Speech is impaired, looks like cerebral edema." Abramov listens, his face turns to stone. He knows the numbers. High-altitude cerebral edema at more than 8,300 meters. The chances of survival are almost zero. "Get him down. Give him more oxygen. Don't let him stop. Do everything you can." The Sherpas pick up the pace. They take Hall by the arms. They're almost carrying him. He stumbles, falls. They lift him. They fall with him, rise again. Hall mumbles in English, then slips into Nepali he picked up from them in camp. A minute later, he begins humming a children's song he used to sing to his sons before bed. Even the high-altitude climbers feel a knot in their throats. They haven't seen anything like this in years. As the light fades and the temperature drops toward 40 below, the Sherpas understand something simple and brutal. They are racing against time, and against Hall's own brain, which is already starting to shut down. This is no longer a descent. It is a fight. And they have no idea that by morning, this fight will take a shape no one believed was possible. The descent changes in an instant. A little lower on the route, chaos breaks out. The German climber Thomas Weber collapses and stops moving. He was climbing with a parallel group, reached the summit as well, and now the altitude has taken him too. The Sherpas try to help, but Weber doesn't regain consciousness. Up here, the body can shut down in a single moment, and there is no bringing a person back. The news jumps through the radios immediately. Everyone understands. Another tragedy has just happened right beside them, and it weighs on the team as heavily as the cold and the thin air. Meanwhile, Hall is getting worse. The altitude hits his head, his thoughts fall apart, his movements lose accuracy. He moves too fast, then suddenly freezes and stares into nothing. The Sherpas sense danger at once. They've seen the signs of high-altitude cerebral edema too many times. A few dozen meters later, Hall stops abruptly, as if he's forgotten where he is and why he's here. He looks past people, doesn't react to voices. Then his legs fold under him, and he drops into the snow. The Sherpas rush over, roll him onto his back, check his breath, and pulse. His pulse is weak but there. His mask is off. The oxygen was escaping uselessly. They swap in a fresh bottle and increase the flow. Hall comes back for a moment, but his connection to reality flickers. His speech is broken, his sense of direction gone. He tries to walk, then falls again. The altitude keeps squeezing him, and every minute makes him worse. The Sherpas decide to drag him down. They haul him under the arms and start the descent. Every few meters are a battle. He barely helps, his body heavy and uncooperative. The Sherpas stumble, lift him again, keep going. Their oxygen is running low, their strength too. The radio crackles. The Sherpas send short updates to base camp. Hall is failing, not responding, condition critical. On the other end, Abramov listens and answers just as briefly. Keep moving him down, keep the oxygen flowing, stay together. But the reality is simple. High-altitude cerebral edema at more than 8,000 meters leaves almost no chance. The Sherpas know this. They are doing everything possible, but they understand what lies ahead. Hours of brutally difficult descent, and far less oxygen than they need. After some time, Hall loses consciousness again, this time deeper. His body goes completely still. The Sherpas stop and check his pulse. It's barely there, a thin thread that could snap at any moment. They call over the radio once more, their voices calm but heavy. Hall is in very bad shape. We're doing everything we can. Everyone down below understands exactly what those words mean. A quiet pause settles over the radios, and the night continues to fall onto the slope, where 3 high-altitude climbers are trying to hold on to a man the mountain has almost taken. The Sherpas keep dragging Hall downward, and the fight grows harder with every step. The altitude is draining all of them. Hall can barely stay on his feet. He walks a few meters, then drops back into unconsciousness. Sometimes he begins to resist, without realizing it. His arms jerk, his legs buckle, his movements turn sudden and chaotic. One of the Sherpas catches him from the side and takes a hit from Hall's crampon. The metal bites through the clothing into his leg. The wound isn't deep, but it's painful. And at this altitude, with almost no oxygen, concentration shatters easily, and any injury becomes a real risk. They wrap the leg quickly and keep moving. Stopping is not an option. Hour after hour, they inch their way down the mountain, almost crawling. The distance is tiny, just a few dozen meters. But at this altitude, it feels like hauling a truck uphill. Hall tries to walk, then collapses again. They have to lift him, steady him, keep him from sliding down the slope. One by one, the oxygen bottles start running dry. First one Sherpa's, then another's. The third switches to a minimal flow. Hall gets the spare bottle. His breathing is too weak, and without oxygen he would slip into complete unconsciousness. At one point, another Sherpa climbs up to them, the one who stayed lower and could move faster. He brings a fresh bottle. It buys them a little time, but doesn't solve the real problem. Everyone is exhausted. Daylight is gone. The temperature is dropping fast. 19 hours have passed since Hall began the descent. He barely responds to anything now. When he opens his eyes, the gaze doesn't focus. His speech is gone. The Sherpas lay him in the snow and check his breathing. It's there, but faint, shallow, almost invisible. His pulse is hard to find. They switch positions, try again, checking the neck, the wrist. Nothing certain. Maybe his pulse is too weak to separate from their own heartbeat, or maybe it truly isn't there anymore. And then the oxygen runs out for all 4 of them, almost at the same moment. They take off their masks and breathe the thin night air. Their heads begin to ring immediately. Their legs turn to rubber. At this altitude without oxygen, even the strongest climbers start to fail. The Sherpas radio base camp and report. He's unconscious, breathing barely detectable, no pulse. The time is around 5:20 in the afternoon. A short exchange follows. The expedition leader makes the decision that every high-altitude rescue eventually reaches when the chances drop to 0. Leave the body and save the lives of those who can still descend. The Sherpas mark the coordinates and check Hall's breathing one last time. It is either gone or so faint that up here it no longer matters. They cover him with his own warm bag, not as a ritual, but to keep the body from freezing solid within minutes and blocking the route for any group passing in the dark. Then they have to leave, immediately. Each of them is down to the last scraps of strength. Any delay would be fatal. They turn and begin the descent. Slow, careful, silent. Down below, the time is logged, 5:20. Lincoln Hall is officially declared dead. Base camp falls quiet the moment the message comes through. No loud words, no scenes. People just sit in their tents and say nothing. Everyone understands. Everest has taken another one. And it has taken someone they knew, someone they drank tea with, laughed with, shared altitude with. Now he is gone, and the absence feels almost physical. Abramov sits beside the radio. In front of him is a list of numbers he has to call: the embassy, the insurance company, the sponsors, the expedition office, a heavy but necessary sequence. He makes call after call, brief, direct. The words, "Lincoln Hall is dead," are repeated so many times they begin to lose weight. But he doesn't allow himself emotion. The work leaves no space for it. Farther down the mountain, people begin lighting candles, a tradition born in the Himalayas many years ago. One candle for each climber lost that season. The row grows longer: Sharp, Klushkin, Weber, and now they add Hall. In Australia, the news arrives in the morning. Foundations, friends, climbing clubs, they pass the message from one to another. The family receives the official notice. The Hall home fills instantly. Friends arrive, neighbors. They hug his wife, who can't feel the hugs. They try to comfort the sons, who don't want to be comforted. Journalists are already at the door. Cameras, microphones. Sorry to trouble you at a time like this, but could you comment? The neighbors drive them away. Leave the family alone. At least now, leave them alone. The world records the fact. Lincoln Hall died on the descent from Everest. And high above, at nearly 8,000 meters, the night unfolds strangely gently. The temperature doesn't fall to the usual 40 below. Thick clouds trap a thin layer of warmth. For Everest, this is almost a rarity. A night that should not have given a man even the smallest chance becomes less cruel. Hall lies in his sleeping bag, motionless, unresponsive, unconscious, with barely any breathing left, balanced right at the edge where things usually end. But the body works in its own way. The cerebral edema slows everything down. And here, that slowdown becomes protection instead of danger. The breaths are rare, careful. The pulse is slow. The body holds its heat better than it would during a struggle. Dawn arrives. The sun rises over the Tibetan side. A thin beam touches the edge of the sleeping bag, then finds Hall's face. At 8,000 meters, the warmth is tiny, but it exists. And that's enough for the body to attempt to climb out of the deep blackout. Hall moves for the first time all night. Fingers twitch. Then the muscles in his face. His eyes don't open at once. The lids are stuck with frost. He blinks, focuses, tries to understand what he's seeing. In front of him is a clear morning sky. No people, no tents, no sound. Only the slope of Everest and the emptiness around him. Hall takes a short breath. His body answers with a weak but steady rise of his chest. He is alive. That's the first thing he understands. He tries to remember how he got here. The attempt fails. His memory cuts off somewhere halfway through the descent. He doesn't know what day it is. He doesn't know how long he's been unconscious. He only senses that the world around him is real, not a dream. Hall slowly pushes himself upright. Every movement triggers dizziness. His body barely obeys him. His left arm moves weaker. His legs respond unevenly. He doesn't know what's wrong. Frostbite, injury, pure weakness. But the main thing is this. He can sit. He can look around. He can breathe. At this altitude, no one survives without oxygen. Not after nearly a full day in the freezing cold. And yet, Lincoln Hall is sitting on the slope of Everest, weak, frozen, bent by time, altitude, and the night's darkness. But alive. No one knows he has woken up. Not the teams on the mountain, not the people at base camp, not his family at home. For the world, he is already listed as dead. And he is just sitting there, trying to gather enough strength to make a single step. Meanwhile, the climber Dan Mazur is making his way toward the summit of Everest with 2 clients. The morning is clear, the wind light, a rare pocket of good weather on the mountain's northern side. They are about 2 hours from the top. The pace is steady, the route follows fixed ropes, everything is routine. On one section of the climb, Mazur notices a sleeping bag off to the side of the trail, maybe 30 meters away. At this altitude, bodies are not unusual, and at first he doesn't even slow down. But when he glances again, something makes him stop. The bag moves, slightly. He steps closer. The movement repeats, not wind. Mazur pulls back the edge of the sleeping bag. Inside is a man. His jacket is unzipped, his chest exposed, his hands bare, his boots half off. Classic signs of severe hypothermia and deep disorientation. His face is frostbitten, his lips gray, his breathing shallow, the eyes open. The man tries to speak. It is Lincoln Hall. He answers questions, gives his first name, last name, country. His mind is scrambled, but the answers are clear enough to show he's conscious. Mazur checks his vitals. The pulse is extremely weak but present, the breathing irregular but steady, critical but not terminal. Hall has spent an entire night at roughly 8,000 meters, without a tent, without movement, without oxygen. In mountaineering, this combination is considered incompatible with life. Mazur radios his base. At first, they insist it must be a mistake. Hall was officially declared dead after 3 Sherpas failed to find a pulse and were forced to leave the body at altitude. But every detail matches: location, clothing, suit color, height, face. It is him. Mazur's team makes the decision instantly. They will not continue to the summit. The clients don't object. The situation is obvious. No debate, no attempts to do both. They follow rescue protocol. Wrap Hall in warm gear, give him fluids, start oxygen, check for frostbite. Within minutes, his breathing deepens. His responses become more coherent. The coordinator radios Abramov's base camp. A message comes through that Hall is alive, found by an American-led team, and conscious. The camp doesn't believe it at first, but the details match. It is truly him. Abramov bursts out of the tent and calls for the Sherpas. One of them steps forward, exhausted, eyes red, sleepless after the brutal night. The guilt of leaving a man behind is still crushing him. The news that Hall is alive knocks the breath out of him. For a few seconds he's frozen, confused. How is this possible if there was no pulse yesterday? Then it hits him. And with that realization comes relief so sharp it almost hurts. His eyes fill with tears. He sinks to his knees and exhales hard, as if shedding the weight that pressed on him all night. The Sherpas gather without a word. They know they have to climb back up, to the same altitude, with the same risks. But now they have a reason. Hall is alive, and there is a chance to save him. Meanwhile, in Australia, it is still night. The Hall home is deep in mourning. His wife sits awake in the living room, looking at photographs of them together. The phone rings. She looks at the screen. An unknown number. International. She answers. Hello? The voice on the other end trembles with emotion. It is Abramov, the expedition leader. I have incredible news. Lincoln is alive. They found him this morning. He's conscious. He survived. She drops the phone, screams. Her sons run out of their rooms. What happened, Mom? She can't speak. She sobs, pointing at the phone. The older son picks it up, listens. His face changes from frozen to alive. He's alive? Dad is alive? Abramov confirms. Yes, your father is alive. It's a miracle. He spent the night in the death zone, alone, without oxygen, and he survived. No one can explain it. The news hits the media instantly. The headlines sound unreal, but they're true. A climber who had been left after a confirmed death has been found alive the next morning. Doctors give their first comments. A night without oxygen at 8,000 meters is not survivable, but Hall survived. Climbers argue on forums, a mistake by the Sherpas, an extreme form of hypothermia that slowed his vital functions, the influence of breathing practices Hall had trained for years. There is no single explanation. Mazur gives a brief statement over the radio. We found a man who should not have been alive. We couldn't walk past him. It was the only right choice. Hall sits wrapped in jackets, breathing from an oxygen bottle. He takes small sips of water. Slowly, his mind returns. His last memory is the summit. Everything after that is blank. Experts will later call his survival a clinical physiology phenomenon, a combination of hypothermia, cycling consciousness, and a deep metabolic shutdown. But right now, only one thing matters. He is alive, and he is surrounded by people who just made the impossible possible. The descent moves painfully slowly. Hall can barely stay on his feet. The left side of his body won't respond. His coordination is broken. The Americans support him from both sides. Step, pause, breath. Every meter down drains strength from all 3 of them. An hour later, Abramov's Sherpas climb up to meet them. They approach in silence as if still unable to believe what they're seeing. They had seen Hall the day before, with no signs of life. They had covered him with his sleeping bag. They had walked away believing everything was over. Now, a different man stands before them. Alive, conscious, frostbitten, weak, but unmistakably alive. They join the group immediately, check the harnesses, redistribute the load, help keep Hall steady on the trail. The descent becomes safer and faster, but still incredibly slow. The altitude crushes everyone. Oxygen is low. Concentration is gone. Gradually, Hall starts to feel pain. The frostbite is waking up. But that's secondary now. What matters is that he's conscious, breathing, responding. After several hours, they reach the high camp. The team lays Hall inside a tent. He collapses onto the mat. His muscles can't hold him. The doctor examines him and says that, for now, his life is not in danger. Abramov steps into the tent. He looks at Hall for a long moment, as if trying to align the man in front of him with the news he refused to believe that morning. He says only one thing, that by the rules he had to inform Hall's family of his death. Hall answers calmly. He holds no anger. Everyone did what the situation demanded. They hand Hall a satellite phone. He dials home. His voice is hoarse, barely audible, but unmistakable. "I'm alive." On the other end, tears, silence, then a wave of relief you could never mistake for anything else. By evening, his condition stabilizes. The tent is warm. He's wrapped in several sleeping bags, given fluids, prepared for evacuation. The Sherpas stay with him all night, watching his breathing, checking his responses. After so many hours of fighting, the body can drop out again, and they cannot risk missing the moment. The next morning, the descent continues. Now, Hall walks on his own, slowly, with support, but he walks. The air grows thicker, his mind clearer. Every meter down is a step toward normal pressure and safety. 2 days later, he reaches base camp. The entire expedition meets him. No speeches, no applause, just the quiet respect reserved for someone who has come back from the impossible. He gives a weak smile and heads straight to rest. His memories of the night at altitude return in fragments, sounds, flashes of light, a sense of cold that didn't belong to this world. The full picture won't surface for a long time, but the fact remains. He survived something considered incompatible with life, and now he's in a tent, surrounded by people who helped him make those last, hardest meters of the journey. On the third day in base camp, Hall asks to gather everyone who pulled him off the mountain. All the Sherpas and Dan Mazur with his partners step into the tent, exhausted, wind-burned, carrying the look of people who truly did everything possible. Hall sits on the cot, his hands bandaged, his face frostbitten. He looks at them for a long moment, saying nothing. In front of him are the men who spent 19 hours dragging him through the death zone and who finally had to accept that he was gone. They sit down, the air feels heavy. Hall thanks them, briefly, but in a way that makes every one of them lower their eyes. He tells them they fought for him far longer than anyone could have asked, and that without them, he wouldn't have lived a single minute. The Sherpas answer simply, they left only when they were sure there was no hope. They haven't slept since that night, not because of the cold, but because of the guilt. Hall repeats it. There is no guilt. They did the impossible. He hands them an envelope, support for their families. Not as payment, but as gratitude. The Sherpas accept it, though the moment clearly makes them uncomfortable. They didn't do any of this for money. Hall also thanks Dan Mazur, Charles Mackenzie, and Adam Piker, the three who, after seeing him alive, turned away from their own summit and began the rescue. Without their decision up on the ridge, he would never have lived to see this day. Their conversation is quiet. Lakpa's father once taught him, on the mountain, a person is not a client, he is a brother. That is why they fought for him to the very end. This simple truth settles straight into Hall's heart. When they leave, he stays alone and suddenly understands with absolute clarity. The summit mattered for 20 years, but it wasn't altitude or willpower that saved him. It was people. In Kathmandu, doctors study his condition. The diagnoses read like a list of reasons he should not be alive: cerebral edema, deep hypothermia, frostbite, critical exhaustion, 12 hours in a coma at 8,000 meters with no oxygen. There is no medical explanation. The only possible hypothesis is that his body somehow slipped into an extreme energy-saving mode, something close to hibernation, a response almost never seen in humans. Hall suggests that years of meditation and breathing practice may have kicked in automatically when his consciousness shut down. He remembers only the image of a gray veil descending from above, and the feeling of standing right on the edge of disappearing. The doctors admit it openly. His survival lies outside the boundaries of medicine, but Hall isn't troubled by that. Sometimes it's enough that a person simply stays alive. Recovery takes a month. He relearns how to use his hands, how to write, hold a cup, button a shirt. Everything comes slowly and painfully, but for the first time in days, he smiles, because he can learn it all. He's alive, and that outweighs every ache. Journalists arrive in waves. Everyone wants the same thing, an explanation. How did he survive? Hall repeats the same answer. A coincidence of 100 factors: the Sherpa's work, the warm night, Mazur's team, his own stubbornness. His answers satisfy no one, but there is no other explanation. The world's press turns him into a legend. The man who came back from the dead. The Everest miracle. He doesn't see himself as a miracle or a hero, just someone who was lucky enough to meet the right people and get a second chance. 2 months after the rescue, Hall returns to Australia. His wife and sons meet him at the airport. Tears, hugs, laughter, a wave of relief so powerful it feels like sound. And in that moment, he realizes something simple. His real summit was never at 8,848 meters. It is here, in this airport hallway, in the arms of his family. Then come the surgeries. Doctors suggest reconstruction, but he refuses. He keeps the scars as a reminder of the night when his body worked at the very edge of what is possible. Hall goes through long rehabilitation. He learns again how to write, how to button a shirt, how to hold a cup. He gets used to a different grip, to movements that are precise but slow. But he is alive, and to him, that outweighs everything. He writes a book, Dead Lucky, Life After Death on Mount Everest. An honest, page-by-page account of what happened. The climb, the swelling in his brain, the blackouts, the hallucinations, that strange inner fight for the last breath, and the people who brought him home. The book is published in 2007 and quickly becomes one of the most cited Everest autobiographies. The season of 2006 remains one of the most tragic on record. David Sharp, Thomas Weber, Igor Klushkin, and about a dozen more. Against that backdrop, Hall's survival looks almost like a mathematical error. A man declared dead, found alive after a night in the death zone, with no oxygen, no shelter, in temperatures that killed others within an hour. He never returns to Everest. The story is complete. The account is settled. Instead of new expeditions, he gives talks, interviews, works with young climbers. He repeats one idea. The summit is not the goal. The goal is to come back and to hold on to the people who walk beside you. When listeners look at his hands, the shortened fingers, the frostbite scars, they don't see a victim. They see a man who stepped beyond the impossible and found his way back. Lincoln Hall died 6 years later. In 2012, in Sydney, from mesothelioma, a rare cancer of the pleura linked to asbestos exposure in childhood. A quiet, earthly death, far from the roar of Everest winds. But his name remains in history not as another man who reached the top. There are thousands of them. It remains as the man who proved that a limit is not a wall. It is a line, one that sometimes you can cross and still come back alive. If you made it this far, this story clearly stayed with you. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about Mazur's choice and Lincoln Hall's second life? And give the video a like. It helps us keep making stories like this.